Hello and welcome to RetroQuest, where we embark on a deep dive into the classics. Today we're revving up our engines and our guitars for a look at Rock and Roll Racing, a high-octane racing game released on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System way back in 1993. Now this is a strange one for me, because as you'll see from my t-shirt, Ozzy Osborne was a big part of this game for me, and obviously very recently he passed away, and that was really sad. What was stranger is that I'd scripted this just a few weeks prior, having attended the Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osborne Back to the Beginning concert. I was very, very lucky to attend that. It's local to me in the Midlands in the UK, and I was very lucky to get a ticket and went along. It was a fantastic event. It was quite sad in some respects to see how clearly unwell Ozzy was as he performed at the end, but it was great to see him. And I guess, at the end of that concert I had prepared this. There were great memories, and I'll talk about it, of this game and how it links to Sabbath's music and heavy metal in general. But when I scripted it, I wasn't prepared for what happened just a few weeks later, and of course Ozzy Osbourne sadly passed away, and as a result I kind of paused and didn't finish recording this. I'd done the gameplay, I'd scripted it, but it just didn't feel right to record it at that time. However, I've reflected on it, and of course it is very sad, but he had an incredible life, an incredible career, and I wanted to still share this video and my memories of an awesome game, which actually in some ways introduced me to heavy metal of that era. So we're going to do it anyway. And I wanted to do this now and share it with you in memory of Ozzy Osbourne, but also to recognise their contribution to a genre which I've grown up with, as I'm sure many of you have. And not only did it feature in my music library, but as well, weirdly, in my video games. So let's have a look at Rock and Roll Racing. Let's spin the logo and start talking.
The stage is set, the green flag drops.
Rock and Roll Racing can be summed up as part racing game, part demolition derby, and part heavy metal concert. It was developed by Silicon and Synapse, the future Blizzard Entertainment, and published by Interplay. The game genre is officially racing, but more specifically it's a combat racer. Think high-speed competition where blowing up your opponents is not only allowed, it's encouraged. True to its title, the game features a rocking soundtrack of classic heavy metal and rock anthems that play during the races, giving each lap a head-bobbing, adrenaline-pumping vibe. In Rock and Roll Racing, players choose from a roster of comic book-styled racers and take to exotic interplanetary tracks in souped-up cars armed with missiles, mines and more. The core gameplay involves racing against 3 other cars, up to 2 of which can be human players, across a series of planets. But unlike a straight-laced simulator, here you'll be trading paint and rockets in equal measure. The developer's pedigree shines through. Silicon and Synapse had earlier made RPM Racing on the Super Nintendo, and Rock and Roll Racing was originally conceived as RPM 2 before evolving into its own beast, a 2D isometric racer with fast-paced action and a loud personality. The game was available on the SNES and Genesis in the 90s, and later Blizzard Entertainment themselves published the GBA version in 2003. Decades later, it even resurfaced as part of the Blizzard Arcade Collection in 2021 on modern platforms, proving that this rock-infused racer has some serious staying power. Whether you were playing on a 16-bit console or a GBA, Rock and Roll Racing delivered a rock and roll experience unlike anything else at the time. Now when it comes to story, Rock and Roll Racing isn't exactly an epic RPG. This game's story is really more of a premise, but it's a fun one. You're essentially a contender in an intergalactic racing circuit, battling your way across various alien planets to become the champion. Each planet serves as a stage in your rise to glory, with its own theme, terrain hazards and a local champion racer to beat. The races take you from the swampy world of Chem 5 to the lava pits of Inferno, with stops at places like Draconis, Bogmire, New Mojave and the Ice World. There isn't a detailed narrative or cutscene during things, but the progression of winning championships on one planet to unlock the next creates a satisfying sense of journey. By the end, you've effectively conquered the galaxy's racing scene, not through dialogue or plot twists, but by literally burning rubber and blasting rivals off the track. The characters in Rock and Roll Racing add a lot of flavour, even without a complex storyline. The game boasts a colourful cast of comic book inspired humans and aliens as its racers. Each driver hails from a different world and has a short profile and enhanced driving stats. For example, there's Snake Sanders of Terror, a rogue earthling racer, Cyberhawk of Serpentis, an alien with a need for speed, Evancifer of Fleagle, Katarina Lyons of the Panteras, and Jake Badlands of Xeno Prime. In a neat crossover, Olaf, the burly Viking from Silicon and Synapse's own game The Lost Vikings, makes a cameo as a hidden playable character from the planet Valhalla. These racers don't exchange witty banter or advance a plot, but their distinct looks and homeworld set the stage for each planetary circuit. Even the enemy AI drivers have personality. Recurring rivals named Rip and Shred show up in every race, and each planet features a dominant rival like Viper McKay or Butcher Icebone as the local menace to beat. The attitude and theme of the game come through via these characters and the announcer's commentary rather than a scripted storyline. Interesting trivia, many characters' names are also a nod to rock music. For instance, Snake Sanders is said to be inspired by Whitesnake singer David Coverdale, and Jake Badlands references guitarist Jake E. Lee of the band Badlands. So while rock and roll racing doesn't have a deep narrative, it creates a memorable world from rock music and racing mayhem. If you're wondering how rock and roll racing actually plays, strap in. The gameplay is where this truly shines. Races are viewed from an isometric perspective, giving a tilted overhead view of the track. This perspective was reminiscent of classics like RC, Pro-Am, and in fact Blizzard's design built upon those ideas, taking the torch from Rare's NES Racer and adding more chaos and polish. You compete in 4-car races. Single player pits you against 3 AI drivers, or 2 players can compete with 2 AI. Speeding through tracks filled with sharp turns, hills and jump ramps, and plenty of hazards. Each race runs for a set number of laps, usually 4, and thanks to the isometric view you can see slopes and corners ahead. Useful when you're trying not to fly off a curve or hit a landmine. Yes, mines, because unlike polite real-world racing, here you can and should blow up the competition. Every vehicle is armed to the teeth. You have a forward-firing weapon like missiles or lasers, and a rear drop weapon like mines or an oil slick to sabotage opponents, plus a limited use turbo boost or jump for quick bursts of speed or leaping over obstacles. The result is a combustible mix of racing and combat. You might be sliding around a muddy turn 1 second and launching a rocket at the car ahead in the next. Getting fragged by a missile doesn't knock you out. Your car respawns just a few seconds later with full health, but you've lost precious time. The only harm done by getting blown up is falling behind, so the game encourages relentless aggression without ever completely eliminating players from the race. Between races, rock and roll racing introduces an almost RPG-like progression system. After each event, you earn money, and even bonus cash for blasting opponents or lapping them. You'll use your winnings in the pit stop upgrade shop to beef up your ride. There's a whole array of upgrades, engine enhancements for speed, better tyres for handling, shocks for stability and those bumpy courses, and armour for more health. You can also buy more ammo capacity for your weapons and more charges for your boosts. Eventually you'll even be able to purchase new vehicles outright. From humble starter cars like dirt buggies to hulking tanks and futuristic hovercraft by the later planets. Each time you upgrade to a new vehicle class, it feels like a significant jump in power. Though note, when you buy a new car, you lose the upgrade you had on the old one. So there's a strategic choice about when to switch rides. The gameplay loop of race, earn money, upgrade, next race is seriously addictive and was relatively deep for a 16-bit era racer. It added layers of strategy. Do you invest in better weapons now or save up for that shiny new hovercraft? This progression, combined with the game's increasing difficulty, keeps you hooked through all 6 planets. In fact, if you don't place high enough in the season, you'll have to redo that circuit, though thankfully you keep your cash and upgrades so you come back stronger. There's also 2-player split screen mode on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, where you and a friend can race together or head to head, which was a blast. Though notably on the Game Boy Advance version, 2 players could link up via cable for multiplayer, since there's no split screen on a handheld. If you were hoping for a 4-player mode, sorry, this was early 90s after all, but even with just 2 players, the competitive mayhem is tremendous fun, as many couch rivalry can attest. A discussion of rock and roll racing's gameplay wouldn't be complete without highlighting its audio-visual flair, which is essentially a gameplay feature in itself. The game is famous for its soundtrack of real rock songs, in their instrumental SNES form, which was mind-blowing to hear in a cartridge game at the time. As you race, you'll recognise 16-bit renditions of classics like Bad to the Bone by George Thorogood, or Born to be Wild by Steppenwolf, Paranoid, of course, by Black Sabbath, and Highway Star by Deep Purple. And the theme from Peter Gunn, a jazzy tune popularised in Rock by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, on the Genesis version, they even squeezed in Radar Love by Golden Earring as an extra track. Hearing these well-known riffs on a Super Nintendo was a huge draw. Reviewers at the time noted that no matter what music you usually liked, you couldn't help but tap your feet when Paranoid started playing. The music was more than just a gimmick. It gave each race an energy and an attitude that perfectly matched the gameplay chaos. And then there's the announcer. The legendary Loudmouth Larry. Voiced by real-life motorsports announcer Larry Supermouth Huffman, he dynamically calls the action. The stage is set, the green flag drops at the start, and hilarious lines like "driver is about to blow" when someone's vehicle is on its last sliver of health. His most iconic catchphrase, "Let the carnage begin," pretty much sums up the game's philosophy. Larry's enthusiastic and sometimes cheeky commentary adds a layer of humour and hype to every race, making you feel like you're in a wild, intergalactic demolition derby broadcast. Between the blaring rock tunes and running commentary, the game's soundscape is incredibly memorable. And if by chance you ever get tired of Larry's quips, maybe after hearing "ouch" for the 100th time as you hit a mine, the game did allow you to tone down or mute the commentary in the options. But few players would want to. It's all part of the rock and roll racing charm. To top it off, the graphics, while 2D, were quite good for their time. The isometric tracks are full of colour and detail, and each planet has its own distinct look, from the toxic green muck of Draconis to the fiery pits of Inferno. The little touches like animated oil slicks or snowdrifts that actually slowed you down make the courses feel alive. Vehicles explode into shrapnel when destroyed, and between races you get comic book style stills of your racers celebrating victories. Overall, Rock and Roll Racing's gameplay was groundbreaking fusion of racing and combat, and it successfully introduced mechanics like persistent car upgrades and a career mode, structured across multiple planets, that were uncommon in races of that era, helping it to really stand out. Even today, fans and critics look back on it fondly. As one retrospective reviewer put it, it's not only one of the more enjoyable racing titles of the 16-bit era, it's also one of the more unique ones as well. In short, gameplay equals fast, loud and ferociously fun. The story of Rock and Roll Racing's development is almost as interesting as the game itself, especially since it involves the humble beginnings of a now giant game studio. Back in the early 90s, Silicon and Synapse was a small band of game makers, around 10 people crammed into a tiny office. By one programmer's recollection, looking to make their mark. They'd already developed the Lost Light Vikings and a little known SNES title called RPM Racing, which stood for Radical Psycho Machine Racing. Initially, Rock and Roll Racing was envisaged as RPM Racing 2, essentially a straightforward sequel to the first racing game. The basic idea was more of the same, an isometric racer on dirt tracks. However, a spark of inspiration and some influence from their publisher Interplay, notably Interplay's founder Brian Fargo, changed that plan. Fargo and the team floated the idea of injecting licensed rock into the game to give it a unique edge. This was unorthodox at the time, getting real songs into a cartridge game, but the team ran with it. They secured the rights to use MIDI versions of iconic heavy metal tracks, and the project transformed from a generic RPM 2 into something much more distinct, Rock and Roll Racing, a racing game with a killer soundtrack and attitude. Interestingly, Silicon and Synapse originally tried for an even more high-profile music collaboration. They contacted the famous rock band ZZ Top to see if they could build the game around them. That idea didn't pan out, likely because ZZ Top was at their peak popularity and licensing them would have cost a fortune. Instead, the team went with a more cost-effective approach, licensing a handful of classic rock songs that could be turned into instrumental game music. This move proved to be pure gold, creatively speaking. With the music secured, the developers also amped up every other aspect of the game to match the rock and roll vibe. As Samwise Didier, one of the artists, later put it, we pushed it from a normal racing game on boring dirt tracks to racing on inferno planets with aliens blasting away at you. We were having fun with it. We can do whatever we want, let's just do it. That mentality of taking a standard game concept and turning it up to 11 with fantasy and sci-fi elements not only defined rock and roll racing, but set the tone for future Blizzard games. Indeed, you can see the studio's love of over-the-top, genre-mixing fun in later titles. This is the same company that would soon create Warcraft and Diablo after all. The development team included several key figures who would later become Blizzard legends. The game's designer was Alan Pavlish, a veteran game designer who'd worked on titles like Battle Chess, while programming was led by folks like Bob Fitch, Patrick Wyatt and Alan Adam, Here credited as Eamon Adam, Alan Adam of course was a Blizzard co-founder, and Patrick White would go on to be lead developer on Warcraft and StarCraft. Artist Samwise Didier gave the game its comic visual flair, and Samwise is known for his distinct art style in many Blizzard games. And even the music composition team was notable. It included the Follin brothers, Tim and Jeff Follin, known for their excellent work on soundtracks. In short, Rock 'n' Roll Racing was built by a small but passionate crew, many of whom would soon make gaming history in other projects. They were young, they loved rock music and video games, and they poured that energy into this title. There are fun anecdotes from this period. Bob Fitch recalls how casual the office culture was. He interviewed wearing a t-shirt with a Tasmanian devil and a snarky slogan, and figured they hired him because he fit in with the geeky, irreverent vibe. Alan Adam later joked that he played so much rock and roll racing in the office that it started to influence the way he drove his real car. Imagining firing missiles at slow cars on his commute. You really get the sense that the team was just a bunch of friends having a blast making a game, and that spirit translates into the final product's fun factor. Development likely took place through late 1992 into 1993, and by the time Rock 'n' Roll Racing released in June 93, Silicon and Synapse was on the cusp of big changes. In fact, this ended up being one of the last games under the Silicon and Synapse name. The company briefly renamed to Chaos Studios and then to Blizzard Entertainment in 1994. The game was first out on the SNES, and Genesis versions followed in 94, by then with Blizzard's new name on it. And one interesting footnote, the Genesis port was actually handled with help from an external UK-based Software Creations, likely because Blizzard was busy with other projects by then. Fast forward to 2003 and Blizzard, now a PC gaming giant thanks to Warcraft and StarCraft, decided to dust off their old classic and commissioned a Game Boy Advance version. This GBA port was developed by Mass Media Inc., published by Blizzard, and it was essentially a faithful recreation of the SNES game for handheld audiences. Many of the original team members had moved on, but the spirit of the game remained intact, complete with the music and Larry's voice samples. More recently, in 2021, Blizzard's 30th anniversary, they included Rock 'n' Roll Racing in the Blizzard Arcade Collection, even creating a new definitive edition with enhancements like widescreen support and high quality music. With vocals, this definitive edition added a few new songs like Judas Priest's Breaking the Law and Rush's Red Barchetta, and restored vocals where possible, although one track, Paranoid unfortunately, had to be left out due to licensing issues. It's a testament to the game's enduring appeal that Blizzard saw fit to release it almost 28 years on. All in all, the development of Rock 'n' Roll Racing was a perfect storm of creativity and timing. A small team taking a simple racing game framework and transforming it with rock music and attitude. In doing so, they not only created a cult classic, but they also solidified a design philosophy. Rule of cool, fun first. And that would echo through Blizzard's later hits. Not bad for a 16-bit racing game with guitars, right? Rock 'n' Roll Racing may not have had $1 billion marketing campaign in 1993, but it certainly made some noise, literally and figuratively, among gamers and critics. Critically, the game was very well received on both the SNES and the Genesis. Contemporary reviews praised its unique blend of racing and combat, and of course the bold use of rock music. For instance, Super Gamer magazine in the UK gave the SNES version a glowing 90% score, calling it awesome for its rock soundtrack and plentiful variety of vehicles, tracks and planets. Though they noted it could get a bit repetitive in solo play, Nintendo Power scored it roughly 82 from 100. Over in the US, Electronic Gaming Monthly awarded Rock 'n' Roll Racing the title of Best Driving Game of 1993, beating out other racing games from that year. That's high praise considering 93 was also the era of games like Virtua Racing and Daytona USA. Critics almost universally love the soundtrack, and one reviewer quipped that when the Paranoid intro starts, you can't help nodding along. Even if you weren't a Sabbath fan, this mix of novelty and solid gameplay made Rock 'n' Roll Racing stand out in the 16-bit library. Players too have long held this game in high regard. Many who grew up with Rock 'n' Roll Racing remember it as a top-tier party game, a sort of edgy alternative to Mario Kart. The two-player mode, the over-the-top announcer, and the sheer satisfaction of blasting a friend's car to smithereens just before they cross the finish line created legendary living room moments. The game's cult classic status only grew over time when Blizzard re-released it on the GBA, and it introduced the title to a brand new generation and also served as nostalgia for its older fans. GameSpot's Jeff Gerstmann reviewed the GBA port and gave it a score in the great range, which is around an 8 out of 10, and he noted that even years later, Rock'n'Roll Racing is still a great game. He remarked that fans of arcade-style combat racing would have a blast with it. In particular, he highlighted the GBA edition, which was a great port of a 16-bit classic, and retained everything that made the original fun, from the isometric action to the unexpected joys of its sleeper hit soundtrack. IGN's review of the GBA version was similarly positive, with IGN scoring it 8.5 out of 10, and stating that Rock'n'Roll Racing delivers a solid racing experience with a killer soundtrack that'll keep you coming back for more. It's not often you see a decade-old SNES game get such love on modern platforms, and that speaks to the game's quality. Beyond reviews, Rock'n'Roll Racing has racked up some accolades and lasting recognition. We mentioned EGM's 1993 award, and that's one trophy for the case. Years later, IGN placed Rock'n'Roll Racing at 72 on their top 100 SNES games of all time list, with the commentary describing it as an isometric vehicular battler that had you cruising around wild tracks while blaring heavy metal music. In a 16-bit library crowded with classics, being in the top 100 and ahead of many other racers is pretty impressive. Complex magazine similarly listed it as one of the best Super Nintendo games of all time, ranking it 84 in 2018, proving that decades on people remember that game fondly. Fans often cite the game's multiplayer mode and audio as the standout elements. The only consistent critique heard was that the single player mode could become a bit grindy or repetitive over long play sessions, which is a fair point, as you do end up running up some tracks to grind money or points if you'll fall behind. Also, the Genesis version got slightly mixed feedback because while it added a song, it had noticeably lower audio quality. The SNES's sound chip gave it an edge and a bit less graphical crispness. GamePro in '94 commented that the Genesis's port, sound effects and voice weren't as good as the SNES's, though they still praised the rocking soundtrack and the fun multiplayer mode. But these were minor quibbles in an otherwise stellar reception. In summary, Rock'n'Roll Racing was a hit with those who played it, and it continues to enjoy legendary status amongst retro gamers. It's frequently brought up in discussions of the best retro racing games or hidden gems of the 16-bit era. As one modern reviewer summed up, if you're a fan of the isometric racing genre, you owe it to yourself to see why so many hold this game in such high regard. It's rare for a racing game from the early 90s to still spark excitement today, but crank up those 16-bit guitar riffs and anyone who played it will instantly grin ear to ear. Rock'n'Roll Racing didn't just ride off into the sunset, it power slid into gaming history with tyres squealing and guitars screaming, and that's a legacy to be proud of. Given how beloved Rock'n'Roll Racing is, you might wonder, did it ever get a sequel or a spin-off? And the answer is yes, though its follow-ups took some interesting turns. The most direct successor is a game known in Europe as Rock'n'Roll Racing 2 Red Asphalt. Released on the original PlayStation in 1997, in North America this title was simply called Red Asphalt, perhaps to avoid licensing confusion. This sequel was developed and published by Interplay. Blizzard was not involved, as by the late 90s Blizzard was busy with other projects, and it attempted to carry forward the spirit of Rock'n'Roll Racing. Red Asphalt featured a new cast of characters and went for a grittier, underground comic book art style. With profile illustrations and ending videos straight out of a 90s graphic novel, it also expanded on gameplay by adding an RPG-like upgrade system for character stats, meaning not only could you upgrade your cars, you could improve your racer's skills over time. The soundtrack moved away from classic rock to more era-appropriate industrial techno rock, featuring original high-energy tracks rather than licensed hits. Despite these innovations, Red Asphalt didn't achieve the same popularity. It flew under the radar for many, possibly due to the middling reviews and the fact that by 1997, the vehicular combat scene was dominated by games like Twisted Metal. Furthermore, Interplay, the publisher, was going through financial troubles around that time, which meant that Red Asphalt didn't get a big marketing push. Today, Rock'n'Roll Racing 2 is a bit of an obscure title, a curious footnote for hardcore fans, but not nearly as fondly remembered as its predecessor. Aside from that official sequel, Rock'n'Roll Racing saw a resurgence in the 2000s in a couple of ways. First was the aforementioned Game Boy Advance port in 2003, which isn't a new game, but rather a faithful remake of the original. It's worth noting on its own because Blizzard updated a few new things. The GBA version retained all the classic gameplay and even managed to include almost all of the original music and voice clips. It also added a 4-player mode via link cables, since the GBA could link up to 4 systems, a feature fans had wished the SNES could have. The GBA release was well received, introducing the game to younger players and giving older fans a chance to carry Rock'n'Roll Racing in their pocket. In fact, GameSpot named it the best Game Boy Advance game of July 2003 when it launched, showing that even in the 21st century that formula still impressed. Many years later, in February 2021, Blizzard included Rock 'n' Roll Racing in the Blizzard Arcade Collection for PC, Switch, PS4 and Xbox One. This collection not only emulated the SNES and Genesis versions for modern systems, but also offered a special definitive edition. In that edition they upgraded the visuals for widescreen, added environmental effects, and crucially used high quality audio for the music, including actual vocals on some tracks and a few new songs that weren't in the original. It was like a mini remaster, and it was a treat for fans celebrating Blizzard's 30th anniversary. Fun fact, Blizzard even got Larry Supermouth Huffman, the original announcer, to record a few new lines for this version, mixing them in with the classic quotes. Talk about dedication to nostalgia. As for spin-offs or related titles, there was an unauthorised fan remake called Motor Rock, released on Steam in 2013, and Motor Rock was essentially Rock 'n' Roll Racing reimagined in 3D with modern graphics. It was created by a small indie team, and it featured the same style of gameplay and even included music that was clearly inspired by, if not directly lifted from, the original game. It garnered some attention from fans, however it was short-lived, reportedly due to IP issues. Blizzard does not authorise the use of likeness, and Motor Rock was pulled from Steam just about a week after it's released. It was a shame for the developers, but perhaps not surprising, the project was treading on the toes of a well-known franchise without permission. Still, you might find mentions of it online. It's part of Rock 'n' Roll Racing's weird legacy in the fan community. It's also worth mentioning that Rock 'n' Roll Racing has had cameos in other Blizzard media. For example, the character Olaf showing up linked these Blizzard classics together. In Blizzard's crossover MOBA Heroes of the Storm, there were Rock 'n' Roll Racing theme mounts and announcers released as nods to the classic, including Loudmouth Announcer Pack, so you could have Larry's voice in that game's matches, which was a delightful Easter egg for fans of the racer. All these years later, the spirit of Rock 'n' Roll Racing still pops up here and there. As we cross the finish line on this retro quest, it's clear that Rock 'n' Roll Racing left a turbo, supercharged legacy in the world of retro gaming. This isn't just another old racing game, it's a game that perfectly encapsulates the early 90s attitude, a time when video games were experimenting with pushing boundaries and having a laugh while doing it. Rock 'n' Roll Racing took the simple concept of a racing competition and cranked up the volume, literally, with hard-rocking music, over-the-top combat and tongue-in-cheek presentation that had players smiling as they blew each other up. Its influence can be felt in later games that blend genres or infuse humour into action. In fact, the developers themselves have noted that the fun, do whatever we want approach they took here helped shape the DNA of Blizzard's later hits, infusing them with the same sense of unbridled creativity and humour. Not bad for a game about aliens, hot rods and heavy metal. In the end, Rock 'n' Roll Racing was remembered not just for its novelty, though who could forget the soundtrack, but for its excellent gameplay and lasting fun factor. It's a game that people come back to decades later and still have a blast with, whether it's two friends on a couch yelling as one narrowly avoids a mine, or a solo player humming along to Highway Star while climbing the champion ladder on Inferno. The game carved out a unique spot in the racing genre, proving that great music and great gameplay is a combination as classic as peanut butter and jelly, or perhaps metal and gasoline. It wasn't the biggest seller of its time, and it never got a huge franchise of sequels, but its impact is undeniable. Rock 'n' Roll Racing is routinely listed amongst the SNES all-time greats, and it's often cited by fans as a quintessential example of a cult classic video game done right. I hope you enjoyed this high-speed trip down memory lane, whether you're reminiscing about tossing bombs at your buddies in 1993, or you're a newcomer curious what the fuss was about. Rock 'n' Roll Racing stands as a testament to the idea that games are meant to be fun above all else. It's loud, it's outrageous, and it rocked our world, pun absolutely intended. If you have your own memories of late night tournaments or favourite moments from this game, I'd love to hear them. Drop a comment down below and share your Rock 'n' Roll Racing stories. Did you have a go-to character? A favourite song from the game? Were you the friend who always mercilessly blew up everyone else, or the one who always got blown up? Let's hear your tales. Thanks for joining me on this retro quest. Until next time, keep your engines revved and your volume turned up to 11. The stage is set, the green flag drops. I'll see you in the next video.